Hi everybody. How you doing today? Gonna try and keep this relatively brief. I know I say that every single time on every video, but what I wanted to do is spend a few minutes talking about the project and some of the ways that I would recommend for most of you to continue working, and some things to keep in mind as you move forward. I've been meeting with everybody this week and seeing what you're up to, which is great. A lot of you have some style frames and some good concepts going, and hopefully I've been able to get you a little bit of feedback about what makes sense and everything else. I want to show you my example. I've been showing that to people as I've been meeting with them occasionally, just depending on where I am in the process. Because our workflow this time is a little bit different than a sort of big, long, finalized sort of explainer or something like that, mostly we're doing a lot of motion tests for this project. And the outcomes will be, expected to be along those lines, and not necessarily something that's, uh, fully fleshed out 3 minutes of motion graphics animation or something. We're going to be putting together a bunch of little samples. To kind of start off, or to go back to some of the things I'd like to share, these were the style frames that I was working on for my boards over the last week or so. Working with the Expo logo, and I'm thinking about, in this first version, something about it being 3D. Maybe it scales out so it looks like there's a camera involved or something. And then these other elements sort of like wipe in or slide in underneath him as he flattens out. And then they sort of do the reverse on the way out. That's the idea for that concept. And then I came up with some other ideas as well. I've got some other thoughts in the back of my head. Now, as far as getting into the motion design side of the project goes, I think that a good way to move forward would just be to choose one or two of your concepts and then start to try and work those out in After Effects. And then from there, make decisions about whether or not you need to do more different things or whatever. Keep in mind, you should only be animating one logo. You can do more or other ones if you would like to, but I think that in terms of being efficient and of being able to focus closely on something and work out the idea, I think it would be a good idea to just stick with one thing and then one or two different concepts and make a bunch of different versions of that. I'm going to start with this guy, and I've made my assets and I've brought them in, and now I'm starting to keyframe those. So getting back to that style frame, I made a little bit of a wipe transition here for the beginning, kind of like what's in the tutorials that I was talking about the other day. The branding for social media, motion graphics tutorial. And then he sort of slides in, scales down. As he goes up the frame, the other letters start to come out, and it shrinks back from 3 dimensions to 2. Now, because I had this color shift, some of that changing shape to from 3D to 2D sort of gets covered up in that little gap. And then at the end, I made a little eye blink, and everything wipes back out, and he flies off the screen again. So this is only 4 seconds long, but it's going to give me a good start. And although I'm not completely finished with this version, I've gotten pretty close, and most of the animation is blocked in. I'll need to come in and refine some keyframes. But I thought that for the time being, this was a good place to sort of press pause on this version of that logo and render out a motion test. So this would be my first motion test. I'm probably going to refine it a little bit more before I add it to the end of the project. But for the most part, it's getting there. The nice thing about doing this kind of project, where we're really focused on one specific thing and a couple of style frames that we're trying to hit, this should give you the opportunity to really, really get comfortable noodling around with keyframes and getting those timings and the overlap or the follow through or some of the other motion design principles to be more refined. So even though we might not be building something that we would consider like a final draft of a big project, we do have the opportunity to sort of really refine and tighten up our timings and how all of these elements will work in the frame together. So I think like for now, I'm in pretty good shape with this one. I've got some more things, like I said, that I wanted to do. But I'm gonna move back in to my project, and I'm gonna start going into the next step, which would be to start making some other versions or to make different examples of this sequence. So while I was doing this, I had a lot of ideas of other ways that I might, make these transitions. Like, for example, maybe instead of him sliding in from out of the frame, maybe it's like a long pullback. So we're like looking through that eye, let's say, to the background, and it starts to scale down, so it looks like the camera is pulling away, and as it does that, it speeds up until it just hits into this location, and then the other stuff happens, right? And then from there, maybe it just comes back straight towards the camera, and that's my wipe. So instead of creating a wipe at the beginning, and then I return to that same frame at the end, maybe I'm going to do that wipe differently and use only the character and stuff like that. So what I would recommend for a lot of you to do when you're creating these bumpers would be to use a iterative process and to always version up as you go. So let's say I'm going to keep going after I got this one done. I've got my file name is right now just which concept this is, right? So this is concept 1, and this is version 1 of that concept. Well, now I'm in the process of moving on to the next iteration of that concept, where I'm going to play with that bumper and retime things and maybe make some different transitions and stuff like that. So I'm just going to save this as a new file, and I'm versioning it up so that when I have my next rendered motion test, which would be, concept 1, motion test 2, I have a way to keep the export or the render video in line with the version of the animation project. And if I need to make corrections, or I want to go back in time, or maybe down the road when I'm getting into the second round of revisions on this project, maybe I can jump right back to this specific thing and then copy or move from there down another path. So I can almost think of the versions of this animation project as different forks in the road. And I want to be able to, at some point, track back some of that work in the event that I needed it. So I'm going to save as 2. And then rather than rebuilding this whole composition, which already has some things that I liked the little eye blink in there. I kind of was interested in the little slide out, how that was coming along. So I'm, again, not going to start from scratch. I'm just going to take that composition. And when you're in the project panel with a composition selected, you can just do a Command D to duplicate. And once you duplicate the composition, you now have a second version of that same thing with all of your layers ready to go. So in my workflow, then, what that's going to turn into is that I'm just going to get rid of this transition at the beginning. I'm going to bring in my layer solid again, which I called light background. I rename my layers all the time, if you guys weren't aware of that, so that I can keep track of, what layer is what. And then I'm going to start grabbing all of my other assets, which again, I'm not starting from scratch. I don't want to rebuild it a million times, but I want to take it in a little bit different direction. So I'm going to come in here, which my null object is controlling 2 layers of that character. And if I press U, I can just open up where those keyframes are. And I'm going to go to the middle part where I lock up on him. And this is where I'm just going to unselect the position and the scale so that I can get rid of all of those keyframes without destroying the layout. Because this is the layout that I'm sort of locking up on for the brand identity. And everything that's before that or leads into that is where I want to make my adjustments to. So what that gives me now is the opportunity to grab my layers and then start to animate or keyframe them differently or again. So as I was saying, I came up while I was working on the last version with an idea of perhaps this is going to come into rest at this scale right around that shift. So I'm going to go find those keyframes. And maybe I want that to just happen a little bit earlier than when the letters start to slide out this time. Yep. So it pops back into 2D and then they go away. Okay. So that's going to work. And then I'm going to come in here and start to keyframe the position and the scale again. So what I wanted is for him to, come into that rest spot at some point. Here he's going to need to slide up the frame. So at some point it's going to end here. And now I'm working backwards. So I'm going to just grab that position and add that keyframe there. So that no matter what, I know that if I change this, I will be able to end up in that position. And perhaps then I'm going to go forward a little bit, and I'm going to move him down the frame. So this is going to give me that sort of drifting up, and then the other stuff shoots out, then I blink, and so on. From here, I'm going to need to do some scale. Now, I could use 3D layers and add a camera and do some of those sorts of things. But I think because this is just a really 2D thing in terms of my character design and my logo, I'm just going to stick with scale as a way to create the illusion of perspective. There we go. And if you remember, I was thinking about this. Oops. I was thinking about this being grabbing the wrong thing over and over again. So I wanted it maybe to look like something like that. Now, I'm getting some crazy curves with my position keyframes. Always remember that you can adjust that. If you right-click on your keyframes, what you'll be looking for is keyframe interpolation, or else under the animation menu, you should be able to find keyframe interpolation there as well. This is what will allow you to switch it back to linear or to change it to Bezier if that's something that you want. Always that will depend on what the project is. And for now, I'm just trying to not break everything. Seizures. I'm going to scale that guy up, and then I'm going to continue to slide it over. And a little bit more. And then that should have it. In the interest of time, I'm going to turn off the motion blur until later so that I can get my preview. and we'll give it a quick test. Yeah, so there's something going to be interesting about this too, I believe. What I'm going to need to work on definitely is retiming some of this. For now, I've just got the keyframed action in, but something about this scale shift is really too... It looks like I've got some extra keyframes in there. No, maybe not. Jumps from 200 to 48 in like one frame, which doesn't make any sense. So I'm going to get rid of that guy. And then I'm going to come in here. Maybe a little bit further down. And that's going to be my 43. There we go. Yeah, it's just because it's going so fast. That big shift of 200% in 12 to 18 frames is a little bit faster than it needs to be. So now that position needs to shift again because it's out of the frame. I was going to kind of use that as my focal point. So slide that over a little bit. And then I'm going to actually adjust that keyframe as well so that the square in the eye is centered in the frame. Now, again, as I do this work, you probably, hopefully, can start to get the sense that when we're working on a motion graphics project of this nature, more so than with kinetic type or with our explainer, a lot of the work that you're going to be doing is about getting these little moments of transition between the different frames that you're trying to hit. So I've still got some work to do with the position keyframes and that scale. I'm going to add easing to them, and I'm going to look at them in the graph editor and fine-tune things a little bit. But the point, again, for the work that we're doing is not that you need to come up with a lot of completely different ideas, although that could be one way to do the work, but to come up with a concept and then develop a version of that, and then create some additional versions or alternate versions of that same animation. We want to be able to provide a client or supervisor or the person that we're working for with some design decisions that they can make based on what we think will work really well, or how we see this logo moving in time. And then from their feedback or from that conversation, we would go to the next round of revisions. For us, we're going to end up in that middle stage. We present or share through a branding reel or a pitch deck different versions of what we think would be great for motion design and this company, whatever that company might be. So again, hopefully this is a starting point for you. I know that a lot of you will be in this range within the week or so. Our end goal will essentially be to make a new composition that's about 30 or 40 seconds. I think it says 30 on our assignment. And so this would be my final version of the project. And in addition to maybe adding a title before I start animating things in, what I'm going to end up with is a bunch of different examples. So this one's going to start at 2 seconds. And because it's 4 seconds long, I'm maybe going to duplicate it twice. Then I'm going to leave a little bit of pause. So there's my branding. I'm going to add a little room, maybe a second in here for another title. maybe 2 seconds, just to give us a little bit of breathing space between them, different iterations. And now I'm going to bring in my second concept. And this is what I am referring to for the project when I say that we're going to put them together into a reel or into a pitch deck. Because now, once I have this sort of all laid out for my 30 seconds or so, I can come in and I can add some of that additional supplementary information, like my name. If I can know how to spell my name, right? And this is going to animate in, so I'm going to sort of wipe this into the shot. It's going to say my name. It's going to say maybe MAGD Invader Concept 1. And then that's going to come in and we'll see that. Then I'm going to duplicate that and add another title in here that says MAGD Invader Concept 2. And then maybe at the end is where I'm going to show the other version, the one with the him shooting down, or maybe I'm going to do something else with it. So this is kind of where we're headed, and I'll talk about this again at a future date. Alternatively, something that some of you might consider: this part isn't necessarily required in the project. But some of you that are doing this work and maybe thinking about going into motion design in the future, and getting back to my style frames, remember that I laid them out into one-to-one format to see what it would look like in a on Instagram or something. So again, I would do this in the same way that I started when I created my second version of the concept. So I would duplicate that. And then rather than having this be the next version up, I'm just going to say this is 1, and then this is square. So that this is going to be the same as concept 1, although it's going to be my square version. And now I have everything here. My animation is done. And I can change my composition settings to 1-to-1. And if I don't see any preset there, I can just type this in manually. I'm going to say it's going to be 1080 by 1080 because that was the height originally. And now I'm going to be relatively close in terms of layout and organization. But if I do need to make adjustments, then I can come back into these keyframes, and instead of starting over again and trying to match everything and copy and paste from composition to composition, all I need to do is maybe change how much it scales down, or change the end position where it locks up because now it's a little bit high in the frame, or something along those lines. So I can revise from that initial version in order to make it fit in this new format. So that's more or less all I wanted to talk about today in terms of the project and getting things set up. It's a little bit longer than I would have liked to run, and I apologize for that. But, hopefully this gives you a good sense of what to be doing next. And I'll be talking with you guys about all of this. The rest of, I think I got 8 people tomorrow for individual meetings. So thanks so much. And I will talk to you very soon.